Hello, everyone. It's good to have you here. We have 11 people waiting for more, but let's begin. As you well know, the topic of today is generalist versus or a specialist. My name is Omar Ali, and I work as a senior engineering manager at Delivery Hero. And I would like to sort of tackle this topic with you today. Fairly quickly before we begin, maybe I don't know how many of you know about Delivery Hero, but you might have heard of some of our brands. We don't operate with the name Delivery Hero globally, but those are some of our brands: Food Panda, Hunger Station, Miam, Talabat, and so on. There's so many of those, and we'll keep on adding more brands. We definitely are either already in or operating or planning to operate in a market where you're currently in. I would like to maybe quickly highlight three numbers about Delivery Hero. 100, which is the number of orders per second that we currently do. We do slightly more than that, but that puts us close to 8.6 million orders per day. We do that in 50 markets, and we're still adding more markets. Maybe most recently, we changed our markets a little bit. We're exiting some markets and entering others, but we're always operating for the past few months closer to 50 markets. But more interesting, I hope, is the 400 plus positions, open positions that we have. We're looking forward to grow our engineering team and our team globally all the time. And I would like to use this opportunity to invite you to check out our careers on careers.deliveryhero.com. Okay, let's start with a bit of a question here. Which one of you guys heard or read this statement before? A jack of all trades is a master of none. Use the QA tab and let me know. First, if you heard of this one, and second, we'll ask another question fairly quickly. Which one of you guys heard of that? +1 in the Q&A. All right. We have 2, 3 with what votes? All right. All right. Pretty cool. Okay. All right. Let's stop here. I think we all believe that we have seen that somewhere. But let's now talk about who believes in that. Who believes that the jack of all trades is a master of none? Can you again paste in the QA tab whether you believe that this is a true statement? Because this is usually used to describe the difference between a specialist or a generalist. We have 1+, we have 2, 3. All right. We have a -1. Yes. All right. Fair enough. In all honesty, I don't believe in the fact that a jack of all trades is essentially a master of none. I honestly believe that we all have this. We all have this as generalists. We always have those lots of traits that we have, but we are usually a master of something. Even being a generalist is a mastery of itself. Being able to juggle all those topics and all those things that you know, and you're keeping tab on progress in each and every topic that you're interested in, this in itself is a mastery in itself. But let's talk a little bit about what does it take to be a specialist. I noticed that my screen maybe is a little bit clipped at the top and a little bit at the bottom. I surely hope that this is not a pretty big impediment for you to understand what the slides are about. But back to this, what is it? What does it entail to be a specialist? I pasted 5 sentences here. One of them is absolutely wrong. I'm going to read them, but I'm going to ask you, if you already finished reading them, to paste in the QA the number of the statement that is wrong, in your opinion. So to be a specialist is to have an in-depth expertise in a certain technology. You're a Java specialist. You know the ins and outs of the JVM. You know quite well most of the lesser known features of that technology. And that's, for example, number 4, expert in lesser known aspects of the chosen technology. For Java, that's the language, the JVM. For DevOps, it might be Kubernetes, it might be some other things, but still you're laser focused on a specific technology. And of course, you stay up to date with the latest on that technology. If your expertise is in Node.js, you do know what the latest and greatest trends in that. You don't really bother much with closely related topics. And finally, you need to switch technologies if your specialty becomes obsolete. All right, that's interesting. So in the QA, I already see that someone pasted that 1, 2, and 5 are all wrong. All right. 1, 2, 4, and 5. Okay. Actually, there's supposed to be one of them only as the false one, but let's have this discussion definitely in the Q&A after we're done with the slides. I believe that, yes, I agree with Solena. Solena. I think that as a specialist, you should still bother with technologies that are closely related to your topic. It's a very famous misconception that if you are a Java expert, you don't have to worry about things like how the file system works on Linux, or how does Kubernetes handle or processes requests, or how the service discovery work. I don't personally believe that as a specialist, you should put yourself in a cocoon or have that laser focused on one topic. Knowing certain topics that are very closely related to that can help you a lot. There are situations where I worked with software teams who were basically about to replicate features that are already available in the operating system level, for example. My famous example is usually when we try to listen to changes on the file system. Some team members would suggest that we build and pull part of the file system rather than someone with a little bit more, not just in-depth in Java, but also a little bit more knowledge around the topic would say, all right, we already have that feature in the file system. Let's use that. Let's listen to changes to that part of the file system. So I personally believe, and I see that some people disagree, that you can't really ignore closely related topics related to your expertise. You need to widen your perspective a little bit. If you're going to spend the 100% of knowledge that you have on specific topic as a specialist, I wouldn't invest 100% of it on one topic. I would still invest close to 80%. It depends on how you want to do things. But I would personally say invest 80% of the knowledge on one topic, but spend the rest of 20% on other topics that are related to that. This can help you in a lot of situations as a specialist as well. All right, but then what does it take to actually be a generalist? Again, 5 statements. I purposely tried to place one wrong, one of them. So also feel free to paste to the Q&A what you believe is the wrong one. But for me, what does it mean to be a generalist? I think the screen is stuck a little. Okay, now it's updating. Basically, of course, having a broad understanding of multiple technologies and topics. What does that mean? I think we all understand. It's not just, if we're taking the Java example, you don't just focus on Java as a topic. If you're a back-end engineer, you would add other technologies. Even if you're still a lot stronger in one of them, you have a broader understanding. You sacrifice here, as a generalist, you sacrifice the depth. If we have a specialist in Java, he's definitely better than a generalist who also is quite proficient in Java, usually, for example. But you also possess transferable knowledge, as in when the situation changes for a specialist from if we're debugging or building a large-scale enterprise application in a specific technology, for a specialist, if we change the technology, a lot of the knowledge that they have becomes less relevant. For a generalist, usually they can port or transfer this knowledge from one topic or from one situation to the other. Number 3 is you're more useful higher up in the ladder in young startups. As a generalist or as a startup, usually, you're not super in-depth usually in a specific topic. You're more interested in people who have a broader understanding of different technologies and can leverage that to build something fairly quickly. Um, Number four, you're much better than a specialist. I mean, specialists focus on one or two topics or have a bit of understanding around the topics that they're interested in. But you're much better because you know a lot more and maybe also more useful. Number five, you're much easier to be replaced compared to a specialist. As in, for a generalist who knows like 10 different topics, it can be much easier to bring another person who knows other different 10 topics. Maybe there's an intersection between them, but it's still much easier than trying to find a different specialist rather than one that you have. If your specialist leaves, it's usually pretty hard compared to when your generalist decides to leave. I already see in the votes three, which is more useful higher up, and four. And for me, it's four. I don't see either being a generalist or being a specialist as a better thing. It's a different way of doing things. And I believe that both would be extremely useful in most team setups. You would usually need a specialist in certain topics and you would need generalists in other topics. The way I see it is if you guys play football or watch most group sports, the team cannot be all. If you're looking at football, if you get a team, and it has actually been proven historically, someone tried to build a team of superstars, only strikers, or people who or players who have more tendency to attack rather than defend, and it might seem to some people that this is a natural success that's waiting for that team. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. That team actually lost its most important defender in the team or midfielder, and that team did not really perform much. But then the question also sometimes I get asked is, do I really need to choose as an engineer whether to become a specialist or a generalist? And I try to cover some of those topics, but of course, there's a lot more to it than that. But I would say that the first and most important part is, what do you actually and really enjoy? Do you enjoy, for example, a specific technology and you feel that this is where you want to spend most of your time learning and doing from 9 to 5, but also sometimes afterwards? If that's the case, go with it. There is always place in, again, as I believe, in every team for people who are specialists and those who are generalists. But also, if you enjoy wearing multiple hats, do you enjoy actually having this switching from one context to the other? If that's your thing, then I think being a generalist suits you slightly better. It's also the pace of change, because as a specialist, you need to stay up to date, as we established, on your topic. So, are you ready to maintain this, being up to date, despite no matter what the pace of change on that technology is? Some technologies tend to have a steady growth, and some would have constantly vibrant community that produces a lot more technologies every month or every year. And that's a question that you also need to ask yourself. If you enjoy constantly learning, I think being a specialist suits you better. One other thing that you also need to ask yourself, do I need to choose? Do I need to choose? Which is the change of structure. If the current team structure changes, if you, for example, change your responsibilities as well, the team structure change in itself and or the change of responsibilities can push you from one side to the other. And then you have to ask yourself that question, whether you want or not. But generally speaking, I also get asked a lot. I work as a ex-engineer, or I'm a generalist, or I'm a specialist. Is it too late to switch? And it's usually no, it's never too late. I think in general, you can start at either side, but I think in general, early versus late stage career is a more determining factor. Usually, when you start your career as an engineer, usually it's easier to focus and it's more useful to focus on less number of topics than focus on a lot more topics. I think that I've seen a lot of engineers try to start being generalists from early on, and it's usually much harder. There's a lot more ground to cover when you start early on. My advice to young engineers usually is to start as a specialist and then decide later or grow into a generalist later on in your career. But I also think that there's another question that a lot of people ask: what do hiring managers actually are interested in, or what do hiring managers choose? I'm not going to cannibalize on the next session or the next panel. That's going to answer a lot more on what do hiring managers actually want. But I just want to cover a few things here. As a hiring manager, personally, I'm never biased towards one of those. There are few things and few key metrics and conditions that I have to observe and I have to respect when I pick team members. For example, the position. For me, a position with a lot more exposure to a lot more different teams is a position that's naturally a generalist. A position where the person is going to be the expert in the team requires a specialist. The position, as in the title itself, the expectations from that person can really influence the decision here. Another one is responsibilities. As in some companies, for example, a principal engineer is an engineer with a lot more exposure to other teams and handles a variety of topics. In this case, a person who is slightly more of a generalist for me would fit better that position. The scale of the challenge is also another determining factor. If I would consider an engineer for a team that is tackling a problem at a large scale in a specific domain, a specialist is definitely the person I'm looking for. One key consideration as well is the overkill. As a specialist, there is a risk that you are a little bit of an overkill for the team, because the level of knowledge and the level of background that and challenges that you have faced in the past would mean that you would be less interested and less excited about smaller challenges or smaller scale challenges. And finally, like I mentioned before, team structure, where I would try to achieve a healthy balance of generalists versus specialists to achieve and have the team run much faster and more efficient. That is pretty much it from my side. I hope I tried to cover that, not necessarily decide for you, because that's definitely not the interest or the goal of this presentation. I surely hope that I tried to explore a little bit of the aspects and pros and cons of each side. It's not set in stone. You don't have to choose early on. You don't have to be stuck in there for as long as it's needed. It's something that you can switch, something that you can change later on. You just need to look at what you want to achieve and how you want to achieve it, and then you can take it from there. Thank you for listening, guys. If you have any questions, please start posting in the Q&A tab. I'd be more than happy to answer.
All right, looks like we've got our first question. Fire away. I'll jump in and out if I need to.
All right. So is Android plus iOS considered a generalist? In my playbook, I would say yes. There are, of course, cross-platform technologies. And if you are like a specialist in for example, Flutter, which, by the way, we're hiring for, and or React Native, those are cross-platform technologies. I would still consider someone who's expert in React Native or Flutter as a specialist rather than a generalist. If you have in-depth knowledge or decent exposure to both Android and iOS, I would say that this puts you as a generalist, because I see that there are significant challenges on each and every platform that some people need to understand how memory management works and so on. So I think my answer to the first question is yes, I would consider that a generalist. Second question is, with learning to code, you start with one language. When do you choose to be a generalist or a specialist? Well, when you start learning to code, you pick one language and usually stick to it. I had a mentor, a really good person and helped me a lot in my career. He used to say that stick to one technology stack for up to 5 years. Most of the challenges, if you are persistent enough and try to expose yourself to more problems and try to solve them with that technology stack, most probably if when you decide to switch technology stacks later, you have already faced most of the problems in other technology stacks. Not all, but most of them. So I would say maybe put that mark close to 5 years. Start with something, continue with it, run with it for a while, and then decide whether you want to add more to your toolbox or you still enjoy that and you want to continue doing that. Another question is, can you keep up being a specialist but still become a generalist, keeping your special skills up to date? Well, that's the $1 million question. I mean, it's of course it's doable. It requires a lot of work. The problem here is if you want to do that and pursue that in your full-time job, it's pretty hard. Because if you're a generalist, you would be pulled in a lot of different directions. Usually, you would need to have more focus on one topic rather than being all over the place. It's delicate, it's hard, but if you can do that, of course, like I said, you don't have to try. You don't have to choose. You can start. You can try to do that. I think it's still worth the effort, and it's still going to be lots of fun. Another question is: Android is becoming more complex. What could I specialize in to make me more valuable as a developer or a candidate? I would say for Android in general, if you already have hit the spot, like I mean, it's for Android. This is already a specialty. If you can specialize in Android itself, if there are more aspects to Android, as in gaming, for example, that are more interesting to you and you'd like to focus even more, the risk that you run here is becoming super specific and a super specialist, and that means that you'd have ideally or generally less opportunities for employment, but that also means that you become indispensable. You're a person whose existence in the team is super important. If you enjoy that, definitely go for it. But just one thing before I finish answering this, also be aware of what market and what opportunities you're going to have, because this is definitely going to be impacted by being like targeting a very small niche of the market. If you enjoy it, I think it's still worth it. Another question: Is it considered a generalist if you know different frameworks but with a single language like Kotlin? No, for me that still plays as a specialist. You still have in-depth. I mean, those different. Boils back to my original statement. Those are closely related topics. If you are a specialist in Kotlin in a specific framework, for me that's still a very small niche. It doesn't make you a generalist if you have more than one framework in your toolbox. Another question: Are companies interested more in a generalist, or do they prefer someone with a lot more specific knowledge or experience? It's all about what do I need to do. If I have a project that is like I'm starting something new, I'm bootstrapping a project or a new idea, I would look for a specialist who can get things up and running fairly quickly. Or another example, if I have an already sophisticated domain and I already have a team of decent generalists, and I have issues in production, I have to scale, I've hit a specific wall, I would definitely look for a specialist. It's I don't think that companies would prefer one over the other, but I would say that for me the rule of thumb is if you are an engineer up to the level of a senior, you're expected to be far more specialist than a generalist, because essentially you're going to be the reference for the rest of the team or the rest of the company for that specific technology. So I expect you to be a lot more specialist in this case. But again, this is not set in stone. Another question: what can you do if you are a specialist but are being interviewed as a generalist? I would be upfront in general about those things, about expectations. That I'm an expert in one specific domain or one specific area, but I have very little knowledge about the rest. If you both, as in the company or the employer, and you as a candidate, are willing to spend the time and the effort into you expanding into the other areas to convert or to switch from being a specialist to a generalist, then I would say that's a win-win situation. Another question: if you were just entering as a junior and wanted to specialize, what would you do? I'd always look for something that I enjoy and find someone to pay me for it. If I enjoy writing code for the back end, I would pick the technology that seems like more interesting to me. But I would always keep checking how many people are actually hiring for that. What is my opportunity as a junior to enter the market through this technology? Because essentially, for a lot of us, it's switching later on is not exactly very hard. So this question, I think, becomes easier or maybe even obsolete later on. Another question: technical managers like you should be generalists, right? I think so. Most of my peers and my managers are also more generalists. They may have started as specialists, but most of them ended up being generalists because essentially, if you go into interviews, etc., you have a lot of ground to cover, and usually it's not going to cut it if you're just a specialist. With all respect, of course. Another question: as a specialist, do you risk becoming obsolete as things change? How do you make sure you don't obsolete yourself? I think this is the most important risk and the most important question for a specialist. Do you risk becoming obsolete? Yes. If you're not up to date on everything that's happening and you are a specialist, run. I read once in one of the agile software development books an important statement. If you are in the best in the team and you're a specialist, do not walk away. Run. If you remain in one team doing one specific thing and you're not up to date with everything that's happening around you, there's a massive risk that once you leave that team or that setup, that company, that's going to be very hard for you to find work. And it's going to take you a lot longer to catch up. If you're a specialist, never stop monitoring and following up everything that's happening in the technology that you're interested in or the one that you call your specialty. Another question. What are some good resources to find out what languages, frameworks, libraries, etc. are good to learn to become a generalist? I don't think in here there's a specific book or a specific, for me at least, there isn't a specific reference that would help you become a generalist. I think as a generalist, the way I did it is honestly after being like sort of focusing on one specific field, I started to expand the knowledge that I have. And as a generalist in general, you are a guy who's or a person who's usually welcoming changes. If somebody presents you with a new challenge, you're not going to shy away from that. You're going to immediately jump and try to take it. If you enjoy, and I think this is very important, if you enjoy moving yourself or making sure that you position yourself in a place where there's a lot for you to learn, I think you're going to succeed as a generalist. Another question is, how good can you be in something specific if you are a generalist? Good question. It's still useful for your team and for your setup that you have to lean towards that. As a generalist myself, when I work with a Java team, I have to learn a little bit more into that and dive a little bit deeper. I don't expect to be the best in the team, and that's not the goal, and I shouldn't be that. I actually hire people who are smarter and better than myself in all the topics that the team needs. But as a generalist, I still have to dive deeper into different aspects of technologies or different topics that the team needs in order for the team to succeed. But I don't try to be the best. There's very little value in that. I need to maintain my focus on the different topics that the team needs: hiring, recruiting, improving team skills, and infrastructure, whatever it is that you need to focus for the team to succeed. You need to accept as a generalist and usually as a manager as well that you're not the best out there in any of those topics, but you're pushing a lot of things forward concurrently. Thanks a lot, guys, for the questions. I think that's the last question.